Welcome back to Toffee Booze, your source for all things Everton. I'm Ollie Hayes, and today I'm bringing you a rumour review for the news that broke late last week about Kevin Thelwell leaving Everton. So let's get straight into it. Obviously, the news broke towards the back end of last week via Paul Joyce, and he broke that Kevin Thelwell would be leaving Everton. He will be expected to leave Everton at the end of this season, following the end of his contract at Everton. Obviously, it's come as a little bit of a shock. It's interesting news. I think most of us probably expected a decision regarding Kevin Thelwell from the Freaking Group, definitely before the end of the season, before his contract ended. But it's definitely interesting news. Obviously, comes surrounding the rumours that the Freaking Group did want a big shake-up of personnel at the club. They wanted to put their own stamp on things, and his job was always going to be under scrutiny at Everton. Obviously, at the moment, it's unclear whether we will bring in a direct replacement for Kevin Thelwell. Or will completely change model. I think Paul Joyce did report that in his article that the decision was amicable between the Freaking Group and Kevin Thelwell, but also whether we go with a different model and the Freaking Group want to put their own stamp on things, it does remain to be seen at the moment. But this video is just to assess his time at the club and go through the best, the worst of Kevin Thelwell, the good, the bad, the ugly of his transfers, and just give him a rank at the end of what I think his time at Everton will be. And obviously, any thoughts in the comments as well about a potential number out of 10 for Kevin Thelwell and his time at Everton. I'm buzzing to hear anything that you've got to say. But we'll start at the very start. Kevin Thelwell joined in February 2022. A very, very difficult period for the club, wasn't it? Fighting relegation under a lot of PSR constraints. I think Rafa Benitez had just been sacked as Everton manager, and Frank Lampard came in. On deadline day, Frank Lampard had brought in Donny van der Beek and Dele Alli, two signings that, in hindsight, were wild, considering our financial fair play constraints. But all of this to contend with, and also the Russia and Ukraine situation, everything happening there, and how that exacerbated our financial predicament, obviously with potential ownership models, which somewhere down the line led to Russia. I think that definitely had constraints on our finances. But as I said before, it was a very, very difficult time for the club. It was a time where we needed a lot of stability and someone to come in to steady the ship. And there was some positives to take under Kevin Thelwell. Obviously, during his time at Everton, during the 6 windows that he did take charge of Everton transfer windows, he actually netted a positive net spend during his time. I think we were the only club in the Premier League to actually achieve that. So again, that's definitely a positive for Kevin Thelwell. As I said before, with such financial constraints being worked under, I think to have a positive net spend, I think it was always going to happen because we actually had to survive, to keep the lights on. But also around a 15 to 20% wage decrease in the wage bill, trying to implement a cost-effective transfer strategy rather than a Farhad Moshiri scattergun approach, should we say, during his time as can we say director of football for Everton. Farhad Moshiri, I think he took a lot of advice from certain agents and certain people that weren't very good for the well-being of Everton Football Club. But obviously Kevin Thelwell came in and went for that cost-effective strategy, went to try and decrease the wage bill and just try and get the numbers for Everton's PSR just on side. And obviously we utilised a lot of free transfers, loans, low down payments. But if we're looking at the top signings from Kevin Thelwell's tenure, I think James Garner is one that springs to mind. Obviously a low down payment, a young player coming from Manchester United, very raw talent. Obviously had a very good spell at Nottingham Forest on loan, but obviously no Premier League experience. So signing a player like him, I think, was always a good bit of business. He's obviously starting week in, week out now for Everton, doing really well in David Moyes' setup. But that being said, I think it was a very low risk transfer bringing James Garner to Everton Football Club. So, Kevin Thelwell has to be praised for that. Another one is Amadou Onana. I think he's another player that maybe didn't fit the mold of Kevin Thelwell in terms of signing quite high. I think it was a £35 million payment to Lille at the time. But I think I remember it being widely reported that Lille were happy to take a low down payment for Amadou Onana. So I think at that point, it was what didn't really fit the mold of Kevin Thelwell, but I think it was again a relatively low risk transfer with Amadou Onana. Him, being such a highly sought of player in Europe and very young, very raw, very physical, was always going to do well in the Premier League. Maybe at times people would have questioned his consistency, for example, or also his commitment to the clause. But you can't question the ability that Amadou Onana had. He was definitely a player in there. But that being said, I think that has to be praised for Kevin Thelwell. I think that was a good signing. Obviously, in hindsight, selling him for 50 million, getting around a 15 million pound uplift on him, a 50 million pound profit was definitely positive for the Bucks. I think it massively helped us. But also, if you're looking at other transfers, James Tarkowski, he's one that definitely deserves mentioning. Whether that was a Frank Lampard signing or a Kevin Thelwell signing, I'm going to tar them all with the same brush and say this was a Kevin Thelwell signing, and bringing him on a free transfer. What a bit of business that is. We know how vital James Tarkowski's been to us in recent seasons. You're looking at him now, he's made 102 appearances in a row for Everton. So, very well, money well spent on a potential signing on fee or an agent fee for James Tarkowski, but to bring him on a free from Burnley was absolutely fantastic business. And as I said before, whether it was Frank Lampard bringing him in with his charm to bring in transfers, or it was Kevin Thelwell, it was just a top signing for me. And also, if you're looking elsewhere in that same window, Idrissa Gay came back to the club. I think that was a very low payment to Paris Saint-Germain, and obviously, what a servant he's been for Everton. Obviously, in that first tenure, he was absolutely fantastic. But him coming back to the club and the amount of good performances he's given us, he's just so consistent, isn't he, Idrissa Gana Gueye? He gives us 7, 8 out of 10 every week, and for the amount of money that we managed to get him from Paris Saint-Germain back to the club, I think it's just you can only you can only describe that as fantastic business. And again, Kevin Thelwell deserves some praise for that. But the last one I will mention, I think a lot of people will probably agree with me on this one. It's Iliman Ndiaye. I think he managed to get him at the second opportunity. I think he did scout him while he was at Sheffield United. And I will get onto that point of re-scouting players later on in the video, but for this one, scouting Iliman Ndiaye whilst he was at Sheffield United, I think that was our number one target after they got promoted. Obviously, it didn't materialise. He went to Marseille for the season, fell a little bit out of favour there. I think that the pressure of him being a Marseille fan as a kid and then going to Marseille and trying to try and compete and try and perform, I think got to Iliman Ndiaye a little bit. But at the second time of asking, Kevin Thelwell getting him through the door this season under Sean Dyche's tenure, what a player Iliman Ndiaye is. I think we've got a real diamond there. One either that we can use for the years to come, or we can get a massive uplift and a good profit on in years to come. But if we're looking at little gems that Kevin Thelwell's going to leave behind from his tenure, I think Iliman Ndiaye is definitely one of those. I think he's a little wizard. Obviously, you don't need to ask me. You can ask any Evertonian on the street what they think of Iliman Ndiaye, and they'll tell you how much they love him, how much we absolutely love him in an Everton shirt, and how good he's actually been in this first 6 to 8 months as an Everton player. But again, that's all the incomings from Kevin Thelwell in his time that I've sort of pinpointed as the best ones. Obviously, there's a few more. You look at Connor Cody coming in on a loan deal for the season. That was probably a savvy piece of business. Connor Cody, obviously very experienced in the Premier League, was Wolves' captain for many years, and coming in on a loan deal, you can see how much it meant to him joining Everton Football Club. You knew how much it meant to him to play for the club, and also keeping us in that division that year. On the final day against Bournemouth, you can see how much it meant to him. So again, I feel like that was a savvy piece of business from Kevin Thelwell. Obviously, it was obviously links with Kevin Thelwell and Wolves, and obviously Connor Cody coming from Wolves. That probably was where that link came from and where that transfer happened. But again, I think it was a savvy piece of business. So if you're looking at the incomings for Kevin Thelwell under the constraints that we were under, I think there's a lot of good players in there. There's a lot of diamonds in there. That's not to say that there isn't a few dodgy ones, and I'll probably get to that in the rest of the video. But there's definitely a few players there which we can look at and say, they're really positive for Everton Football Club. They've done it. They've come in and made a difference. But again, if you're looking elsewhere, if you're coming away from incomings now, you're looking at sales. The two high profile ones were obviously Amadou Onana to Aston Villa for £50 million and Anthony Gordon to Newcastle for, I think it was around £45 million. So top money for two players, almost 100 million for two players. Obviously, Anthony Gordon coming from the academy, that's pure profit for the Bucks. So again, that can only be attributed as positive. Amadou Onana, obviously 2 seasons at Everton, going from a £35 million player to a £50 million player. Whether, you could argue that we might have got a little bit more for Amadou Onana if we weren't under financial fair play constraints. It remains to be seen. Would he have stayed for a little bit longer? But that being said, I think the way we managed our business with those two players, I think I don't want to be too harsh on them, but I think Amadou Onana, by the end of his time at Everton, his head wasn't in it. He didn't want to be at the club. I think he was already dreaming of Champions League football and thinking of bigger and better things. And for me personally, I was always an admirer of Amadou Onana. I thought he always had something to offer in an Everton shirt. I think he got at times a little bit of unfair criticism from Everton fans, but as well as that, Anthony Gordon, I think he was a player that he needed to leave the club. You can only judge the reaction of Abdoulaye Doucouré and Jordan Pickford to saving his penalty against Newcastle earlier this season. You can only see how much that meant to them to show what kind of person and what kind of person he was and what kind of player he was around the club. So I think getting 45 million for him at the time, I don't think I think he was actually hindering Everton at the time. I think we were trying to shoehorn him into the team when his head wasn't in it, and I think to get the money we did for Anthony Gordon, I think was a good piece of business. Obviously, in hindsight, people will say, yeah, he's a 70 million pound, 80 million pound player now, but I think to get the money that we did for Amadou Onana and Anthony Gordon at the time we did, I think was a good bit of business. So again, I think Kevin Thelwell has to be given some praise for that one. But elsewhere from outgoings from the first team, I think Kevin Thelwell used the academy very well to balance the books. Obviously, I know it doesn't really set us up too well going into the future. We haven't really got many top players coming through. Off the top of my head, you've got Sharif in the under 18s. You've got some under 21 players that are coming into the first team now. You look at Harrison Armstrong, for example. He's on loan at Derby County for the rest of the season. So there is a few little diamonds there coming through, but if you're looking at the players that did leave the academy during Kevin Thelwell's tenure, you're looking at Lewis Dobbin, for example. A lot of people maybe were tipping him to be a regular starter or at least a regular in the first team squad. But again, that didn't materialise. He went on loan, he went on various loans, and then obviously was sold to Aston Villa last summer in kind of a swap deal with Tim Iroegbunam. So I think that's positive. Obviously, we've got Tim Iroegbunam out of it. I think he's a decent player. He's going to be similar to the likes of James Garner, for example. I think he's going to be a player that we've bought young with decent potential, and he's just going to be a solid Premier League player for years to come. But again, if you're looking at what Lewis Dobbin's done in an Aston Villa shirt, and then also when he went on loan to West Brom at the start of this season, he's not pulled up any trees. So, I think if you're looking at how it sets us up for the future, obviously you're going to say it's negative, but in my opinion, the way Kevin Thelwell used the academy and utilised it to get some profit, some pure profit on the books to help our PSR situation. I think you can only attribute that as positive. You look at as well Ishe Samuel Smith, for example, going to Chelsea. I think that was £4 million. I don't think any Evertonian, me included, I don't think any Evertonian actually saw him ever kick a ball. So to get £4 million for a player that none of us have ever seen kick a football, I think was positive. And also Tom Cannon as well, leaving the academy and going to Leicester. I think it was for £8 million, but also inserting a sell-on clause into that one. So then when he went to Sheffield United this January transfer window, we got a little bit more money out of that. So again, people will look at the way he used the academy and the way he used those players coming through as pure profit. People will say, yeah, I don't think that's positive because you're not setting us up very well for the future. But young players come and go. I think there's going to be more players coming through the ranks every single year. Harrison Armstrong, for example, I think he's a top player, so we can utilise him in years to come. But they all helped the books. They all helped our PSR situation. So again, in the mess that we were in at the time, I think that can only be attributed as positive. And if we're looking at it as well, he did work under a lot of constraints at Everton. There was a lot of constraints, a lot of difficult circumstances that he had to work with. No money to spend, and then when he did have money to spend on low down payments, for example, other players were going to different teams because they presented better opportunities. The situation Everton were in, fighting relegation every season, I think a lot of teams were presenting better opportunities to players. For example, you look at Yankuba Minter at Brighton, for example. I know that was kind of a little bit of a swap deal with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and obviously that didn't materialise. But I think in hindsight, Yankuba Minter probably wanted to pick Brighton over Everton. It just represented a little bit of a different opportunity, and that can't be attributed to Kevin Thelwell, in my opinion. That has to be on the players on the pitch and also the hierarchy and the way Farhad Moshiri has mismanaged us for so many years. But yeah, I think there's a lot of positives to take from Kevin Thelwell's tenure. That has to be said. However, there is a few negatives which I'll get onto, and I did touch on it a little bit earlier in the video. He did like to stick to certain transfer targets for way too long, and obviously I spoke about it with Iliman Ndiaye. He went back to Iliman Ndiaye for a second attempt, and that one managed to come off. Obviously, we know the other saga that Kevin Thelwell liked to embroil himself in with a certain Leeds United, and it's obviously Wilfred Gnonto. I think the amount of news videos that I did reporting our interest in Wilfred Gnonto, I think you probably got sick of me hearing, you probably got sick of hearing me talk about Wilfred Gnonto. It happened that many times, but no, obviously we tried way too hard to sign Wilfred Gnonto. But I think walking away in hindsight was probably the right thing to do. Leeds United wanting way too much money, upwards of 30 million for Wilfred Gnonto, and I think. Yeah, okay, he did like to fixate himself on these targets too long, but I think Kevin Thelwell was in the mindset that if it did get too much and it wasn't good for Everton, I think he did walk away. But obviously, getting towards the back end of the window, that also then becomes too little too late, and you're missing out on key signings, fixating on these one targets. But not to mention a certain other incoming in Thelwell's tenure. It's obviously Neil Maupay. I think he scored one goal for Everton. Obviously, if you're looking at 10 years at Everton, Tim Howard scored the same amount of goals as Neil Maupay in his time at Everton. So one's a striker, one's a goalkeeper. You do the maths on that one. But again, that was probably a very poor decision. Could that be attributed to the financial constraints that we were under at the time? Obviously, we were working down a list of players that we could get for a sensible bit of money. Was it just due to the financial fair play rules and we were backed into a corner needing a striker? I'm not so sure, but whoever sanctioned Neil Maupay to come to the football club, I think it was a very poor decision. I think that one probably has to land on the toes of Kevin Thelwell. But again, that kind of wraps up the entirety of Kevin Thelwell's tenure. All in all, I think I'm gonna stick to a 7 out of 10 for Kevin Thelwell. That might be a bit generous. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, obviously. But I think Thelwell worked very well in difficult circumstances. I think he was targeting the right profile of player, but I think sometimes he just stuck too much on one target. And you're looking at other targets go to other clubs while we're fixated on Wilfred Gnonto, for example. I think that was maybe where he came unstuck a little bit. But I think the targeting of right profile of player was definitely there, but just under the financial constraints that we were under and the difficulties with financial fair play. I think, it was probably just a little bit too difficult for him to pull that off. So maybe if he moves to a different club and we see him working with a big budget and he can get the transfer targets he wants, that would probably be better. But I think we have to give him credit for the way he restructured obviously the wage structure at Everton and also the transfer strategy. I think was very good for the difficult situation we were in. But that is all from me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about Kevin Thelwell. Obviously, the news that broke via Paul Joyce last week that he will be leaving the club in the summer at the end of his contract. Let me know your thoughts. Give me a number out of 10 for Kevin Thelwell on what you think he did during his time at Everton. But that is all from me today. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and I'll speak to you soon.